Hey folks, sorry about the glare and the reflection on the glass there, but in this video we'll be talking about sponge filters. Now I've got a video out talking about biological bacteria and the cycling process, so that may help you understand this video also. But this is going to be part of my filtration series, talking about the different types of filters and how they work. And we're going to talk about a sponge filter today. And that's what this right here is. Sponge filters work a whole lot like undergravel filters. If you haven't seen my undergravel filter video, you can go look that up. But basically a sponge filter, if we break it down to its most basic description, is it's a tube of some sort. It can be a commercial made one like this, or it can be a homemade one made out of PVC, but you have a tube running down. You have a weight on the bottom, so if you make one yourself, you can take a piece of PVC and say glue it to a ceramic tile, like a floor tile or something, and in the tube is your airline. It keeps trying to focus on my finger. So you can see the airline running down into the tube. This commercial made one has a diffuser down in there that breaks the bubbles up some. Not very much, so some of them incorporate like an air stone if you were to make your own to make the bubbles. And the air pump pumps air in the airline and down into the tube, which creates bubbles. The bubbles go up the tube, and as the bubbles go up the tube, they create a suction upwards behind them, pulling water up. Since it's pulling water up the tube, behind the sponge here, or in the middle of the sponge, there are either holes or slits or something to allow water to go into the tube through the sponge. So the water being sucked up the tube is being pulled through the sponge, through those holes and up. So you're getting your water flow through the sponge. So this works similar to how on the undergravel filters the water gets pulled up the uplift tubes, through the gravels and up the uplift tubes. But instead of using the substrate, in this method, you use the sponge. The sponge is your bacterial bed, where your beneficial bacteria grows on your sponge. So the sponge becomes your biological filter, and to some extent a mechanical filter, in that particles of food or fish waste or whatever will collect on the sponge, and once a month or so you take the sponge off of your tube, you put it in a bucket of tank water and wring it out and rinse it that way, and the particles that are in the sponge will come off in the water. It's not a very efficient mechanical filter, but it is to some extent. But they're very efficient as a biological filter. The downside of these filters are, one, they don't have really any method to do chemical filtration. I guess you could, in some method, put activated carbon or something in the uplift tube, but there's not really a method for that, or not really a good way to do that. Other downsides to it are, I have seen fish go down the uplift tube and get stuck. But benefits to it are, first off, the suction for the sponge there isn't as strong as, say, a canister or a hang on the bag filter or something like that. So it's great for breeding fish, for fry, for shrimp, for small fish. They're not going to get sucked up in the filter. Actually, a lot of fish and shrimp and stuff might pick at the sponge itself to help clean it and get little particles off of it. Also, on the filters here, on the sponge filters, the uplift tube extending up, the longer the uplift tube is, the more water it will pull behind the bubbles. So like on this one here, it's got that uplift tube there. This one here, I've removed it, so this one over here is actually pulling water faster than this one is, because the bubbles are starting to spread out at the top of the sponge there, so they're not pulling as hard. And I laid the uplift tube down here in case I wanted to use it later. Or if I was to extend this uplift tube on up, it would pull even faster, making the sponge more efficient. Also, the sponge filter is run off an airline tube and off an airline pump that uses less electric than a power filter, like a hang on the back or a canister, or say a sump with a return pump on it. And for like this setup, I'm running 3 tanks off of one air pump, and I could run 6 or 20 or whatever off of this single air pump. So it's less energy being used. With the sponge filter here, there are no moving parts. So there's no impellers to break, no motors to lock up, no wheels to fall off, nothing like that. You don't have to worry about getting shocked by your sponge filter there, because there's no electric inside the tank for the sponge filter. The cleaning of it, as I mentioned earlier, you just take the sponge off and rinse it off and wring it out and stuff in some tank water. They're great little filters, and one of the more popular ones in larger scale aquariums, such as people that keep a lot of tanks in the commercial industry, breeding, that type of stuff. A lot of people use the sponge filters over the under gravels and power filters and box filters and canisters and different stuff like that. Look, I was trying to poke his head out for a second. Thought I might catch him. But if you have any questions about sponge filters or anything else like that, drop them in the comments. And until next time, rate, comment, subscribe. We'll see you then.